All right. Thanks for having me, Mobilism conference organizers. It's always a pleasure to be in Amsterdam. I absolutely love this city. So big hand to Mobilism for doing this. Peter's like, get on with it, Brian. All right. So who here wants to get into some like hardcore, low-level native code? All right. So let's hack. Let's do this. It's like saying, yeah, I like going to the dentist. I like this stock photo, as if that ever happens. It's like, I can't wait for him to pick my face apart with that shit. Okay, so does anybody recognize this little chunk of JavaScript code? Hands up. Come on, a few JavaScript hackers? Gotta be. All right, well, nobody should have to know how that fucking works. So I'm not going to talk about that. I heard some people last night, they're like, I hope there's not too much code, and I'm going to try and keep this as interesting as possible, but we're talking about device APIs today, and device APIs do unfortunately involve code for the most part. But device APIs are pretty cool. They're not as cool as a dwarf riding a unicorn wearing high-top sneakers with an AK-47 that's got a lightning bolt hitting it. But they make your computer kind of aware of what's going on. And it's an interesting thing to think that just like 5 short years ago, we didn't really have devices that are as smart as the ones that we have today. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. So I'm Brian. That's my website if you want to stop paying attention and just screw around on the internet or on your phone. I work at Nitobi. They pay me, so I'll talk about them a little bit. And I primarily work on PhoneGap. Which, has anyone here heard of PhoneGap before? Oh, it's a mobile conference, that's cool. All right. And I'm a bit of a geek. So HTML5, everyone's really stoked about it. All of a sudden the web is kind of native. But what does HTML5 mean? It's becoming this kind of amorphous thing that's full of different ideas, and some of them are dislocated, and some aren't actually a part of the spec in any way. If you remember the whole Ajax thing, or Web 2.0, and then Web 3.0 maybe, it might not mean much at all. But there are parts of this that are really exciting. So the thing I love is the idea of an installable web app. And what does this mean for an installable web app? Well, installable web apps are essentially they're Chromeless browser instances. In order to do this, though, we need a few things so that our Chromeless browser instance is available when it's online or offline. One of the big parts of mobile devices is they're not always connected. How many people here are on the T-Mobile network? So those guys aren't connected. It's the same joke for AT&T in America. So HTML5 gives us some tools to deal with this. We've got the cache manifest. This allows us to mark static assets for caching on the phone. We have local storage, which allows us to store some data on the phone. And now we've got IndexedDB. It's the new spec for a database on your device. There used to be SQLite, but the browser standards bodies decided that they didn't want to use SQLite because it was an implementation, not a spec. So they're using IndexedDB, and they're building it on top of SQLite. So there you go. Installable web apps. So usually they're accessed via bookmark or a shortcut of some kind. There's no browser Chrome whatsoever. And my favorite example of an installable web app, if you've got an iPhone, this app works really great. It was written actually at the first jQuery conference, and it's called Circle of Death. And so Circle of Death is kind of this fun drinking game. I challenge you to attempt getting through 2 or 3 rounds of this tonight, if you can. And this is entirely a web app. This all lives on your phone ultimately, but it's written with web technology. It takes advantage of a few of Apple's extensions to the WebKit browser. So we're going to say that we're going to have a status bar that's black. It's the top status bar. We can say that it's mobile web app capable, and this means that when you say add to home screen, that's what the incantation is in your web page to get that. And then we can mark down what icons that we want to use and what splash screen we want to use. So you can create an experience on your iPhone at least that is identical to installed app, but no app store. Sometimes people call these widgets. This isn't new territory. Vodafone's done this for a long time. Some guys over at RIM here are smiling at me. They've been doing this type of thing a little bit too. We'll talk about you guys. The widget spec at the W3C covers something called a config XML file. This is kind of like the bread and butter of the widget spec. The config XML allows you to mark up metadata for your installable app of whatever it is, and what the hell is that? Metadata being like your icon, your splash screen, the name, the author, attribution, licensing, this kind of thing. Boring stuff. That's right, I was going to talk about device APIs. Okay, so first device API is kind of new. Navigator.online. Has anyone used this before in an app? You've used this? Yeah? Did you notice that? It's capitalized. Okay, so software developers are known for being bad designers, and this also extends to the code we write. So the L's capitalized, and when I first saw that, this was my reaction. I'm like, why would you do that? An extra keystroke. It looks so horrible and ugly, but someone wanted to like stay consistent with DOM camel casing, so they had to make that capitalized. It's really stupid, but the good news is no one's actually going to use that. I wanted to point out another API that who here is a Java programmer? Okay, some people will admit it, most won't. It's okay. Hello? Whoa. Does this thing run on Java? Hello? Hello? Am I on? Okay, all right. Okay, so one big part of Java, they love namespaces, and namespacing prevents conflicts. And so as long as you have really good namespacing, you don't have to worry about someone stepping on your code. So here we've got a really safe namespace, but right when we got to browser, whatever developer was working on this just gave up and said, fuck it, I'm going to call this thing field 2. I don't care about my job anymore. I hope you fired that guy. The best part about this, and I have to make fun of you guys, I'm sorry you're here. So, is there a field 3? So, right? So the best part about this, in BlackBerry 5.0, it uses the BlackBerry proprietary browser, but in BlackBerry 6.0, this uses WebKit. Sweet. So that's my favorite. This is why we can't have nice things. Okay, it doesn't really matter anyway, so I don't want to make fun of RIM too much. Back to the online-offline story. When we're doing online-offline, if we're just checking a property, it's kind of useless. One big part of JavaScript programming is that we want to be able to subscribe to events and see what's going on when it's happening in real time. You're not just going to check and say, oh, I'm online. Sweet. I imagine I'll stay online. Probably not going to happen. You're going to go online and offline a lot. And so we're going to add an event listener to the body to check for online and offline events, and this is the clean way of doing it. A level up on this idea is a new API, and I'm not sure, I think this might be in Android 3.0. It's most certainly hitting Chrome very soon. This is part of the Network Info API, and this is out of the Device API working group. So it's a little bit of heinous code. We don't have to really go through this. The essential idea is we can not only check whether we're online or offline, but we can check and see if we're on a 3G network, or if we're on Wi-Fi, or if we're on Edge. This is extremely useful because we might be downloading large images. We might want to know if you're on Edge, you might want to know what kind of situation you're in. So when we talk about device APIs in the PhoneGap group, we're trying to split them up into sort of 3 different areas of concern in order to deal with our sanity. So device APIs can be loosely defined as sensors, data persistence, and outputs. And what do I mean by those things? So sensors might be things like your camera, your magnometer, which is a compass, your GPS, your gyroscope, your accelerometer. These things are all actually geospatial things. It could be a whole bunch of different things. It could be your ambient light sensor. And so these things are evented. Your data is things like your contacts, your media, locations. I don't know if you guys noticed, but a little while ago, Apple kind of got into a bit of a snafu where people freaked out and they're like, oh my God, Apple's recording my location. How evil. They also are recording your contacts and your images and all kinds of other data on your phone. If you think about it, they've got all sorts of things on this phone. And the important learning there isn't that Apple's evil or that any of these device manufacturers are evil, is that your device is a very personal device. I think Luke said this earlier. This is probably the most important piece of identity that you've ever had. It knows not only where you are, who your friends are, it knows when you're doing all these things. And so this isn't good or bad, this is just something to be aware of. It's something we think about a lot too. Sensors are kind of like asynchronous events, and data, is anyone here familiar with the term CRUD? A few people, most people, almost everybody now, okay. Create, read, update, and delete, or RESTful. And this type of API is absolutely perfect for JavaScript, which is interesting to us. And I'll get back to that a little bit later. Device outputs are another area that I think can be really exciting. We're not there yet. So there's some obvious ones. Our phones can vibrate. That's a way for our phone to talk to us in a sense. It's got speakers, so your phone rings. Your phone can play music, possibly on tinny little speakers. Some devices, actually BlackBerry devices, are really good for this. There's lights all over the place to notify you of different things in a bewildering way. And then, obviously, there's a screen, which is the ultimate output device. And many of these devices these days have a USB port, and so some even have HDMI out. It's not inconceivable that there's multiple screens. And I'm not sure what this means, but this is something we're thinking about when you consider what a device API is. There might be different ways for your device to talk to what it's doing. It's just a rad picture. Okay, so there's no reason for that. So traditionally, our computers were really static, and I think Luke covered this way better than I could. They didn't really go anywhere. They just sat there. They didn't really have any sensors. They're big, giant desktops and keyboards and a mouse. There wasn't anything really exciting about that. Device APIs were kind of the realm of large installed kind of situations. So I'm thinking like radar on boats or perhaps weather vanes, this kind of thing. Now our phones are all device APIs. But it makes you ask, like, what exactly is a mobile device? And I'm not too sure what the answer is. It can be a whole bunch of different things these days. Cars could be considered a mobile device. Does anybody know who this guy is? Come on, we're in Holland. A very famous Amsterdam computer scientist. And he's got this awesome quote that I absolutely love. The nice thing about standards, there's so many to choose from. That's a really great Dutch way of saying it. So let's get into standards. The W3C likes to divide things up to keep it nice and tidy and organized. Many of these things actually fall under the umbrella of what the marketing people will call device or HTML5. There's two really big groups that are trying to tackle this problem. Or maybe this problem is trying to tackle these groups, I'm not sure. We've got the W3C and the WAC, and the WAC stands for the Wholesale Applications Community. When we think about standardization, though, it's not really just about the people that are writing standards. There's also a whole bunch of proprietary companies working on these problems implementing. And so the implementers that are out there, Google Gears is probably one of the first groups that ever touched this idea that tried to tackle the concept of what a device API might look like in a browser. Nokia has been doing this stuff forever. Has anyone played with WRT? Right on, that's awesome. Yeah, WRT is super cool. It was a really early idea around this. Vodafone was doing this widgets. BlackBerry is on board now with WebWorks. Qt Mobility, which we'll see in MeeGo, is another stab at this. HP WebOS has been doing this. Samsung Bada is going this way, and of course the PhoneGap project's taking this. I think the lesson here is that there's a lot of people working towards making the web a first-class platform for software development. So let's talk about the DApp. The DApp is known as the Device API Working Group. They were formed in 2009. And there's a clear influence from a former group called Bondi, which became Whack. Is there anyone from the DAP here? No? Okay, cool. All right. So the DAP is tackling a lot of different areas. I won't bore you by reading all this stuff because I think you can read if you got this far. So this is really ambitious stuff. And some of this stuff is kind of weird. I don't know how well you can see this, but things like calendar and gallery and tasks aren't necessarily APIs or fit in the API bucket to me. They seem more like apps. And when you start to think about it, maybe all these things could be apps, which is confusing. So here we go. At the very simplest point, we could look at what the device object wants to tell us about itself. And if any of these things are implemented with PhoneGap, I am selfishly going to put that at the bottom of the screen. So really simple, we can just ask the device, who are you? Getting a little bit more complex, we could create a contact, which is pretty interesting. Actually, I got a funny story here. I was testing our contacts API just yesterday, and I was running through the test, and it's like, contact successfully deleted on my phone. And I'm like, nah. So I read the test, and sure as hell, it doesn't create a new contact and delete that. It just deletes the 70th contact in your phone. So I got to fix that. So I don't know who I lost. It's pretty awesome. That's software development for you. There's a convention in all these APIs that we're working with asynchronous code, and so we're passing callbacks, and so we're throwing functions around. And so up here, I'm saying my success function is called win. I'm just going to map it straight to console log. We have a failure function. I'm really lazy, so failure is just like winning to me. And then I'm going to apply a filter, and just to be super literal about it, the W3C decided to call the filter object's first property filter. I don't know why. And then we give it a start before, which is this super easy to remember timestamp, which, there's probably no possibility of error in you typing. And that's all we have to do to perform a calendar search against the device API. So there's room for improvement. Media capture is super cool. We've implemented this in PhoneGap as of last week, and it's built on top of some older stuff that we're doing. And so media capture doesn't just cover images. We actually cover audio, video, and images. So you can capture any of these things from the device. There's some confusing bits in here because sometimes there's multiple inputs. You could have more than one camera, for example. You can go to docs.phonegap.com to read more of it. Essentially, in this code example, I've got a success function, a fail function. I forgot to write the word function, so this wouldn't actually work. I pass them in to capture an image, and then I apply that image back to a DOM element using jQuery or something like that. This is kind of like a bonus round here. We'll go a little bit deeper into it. If we were going to capture some audio on a click event for an element named capture, this is basically what it would look like. Once I capture that audio, it might capture more than one file. We can loop through those files, and we can call a function called upload. This is what the file API looks like, and we've implemented the entire thing inside of PhoneGap today. And remember, this isn't just to talk about PhoneGap. These things are coming to your browser. Sometime in the very near future, some of this stuff is already in Chrome. And so it's that easy to now upload directly from your web browser, reading in files, which is kind of cool. We couldn't do this before. So messaging. Messaging is an interesting one. In the DAP group, there is programmatic ways to do this. In the PhoneGap project, we've decided to hand this off to URL protocol handlers. And so what I mean by that, have you ever typed like an anchor tag, done an href, and then said mail to? Put up your hands if you have. So you know what I'm talking about then. Imagine you just did SMS or MMS. And that's exactly what this is like. We could give programmatic ways of doing this, but we felt that there were a lot of opportunities for spammy type behavior if we allowed apps to just send SMSs and read your contacts. So if you use the URL protocol handler, it's going to invoke the native UI. So the user will be kind of notified. It's like a built-in security feature in a sense. This horrible slide is from the W3C, and it's not something I expect you to read, but more I just want to give you a sense of the kind of APIs that we're going to see hit the browser. If we look at this, some of the more interesting ones to me are around CPU, ambient light, battery, network connectivity. All these things are coming back to the browser at some point. So we're going to be able to write some very powerful apps for our phones. Battery status is quite cool. If you have a data-intensive application and you're really working the phone over, you're going to be able to notify the user or do the right things. This will allow you to create more polite apps, and users tend to like polite apps. So in this function, or in this example, we're subscribing to the battery status event, and we've got a handler. It just returns whether or not it's charging and how much it's charging. The gallery API is really similar to contacts. I'm not sure how I feel about this because there's a lot of different locations on your phone to store things. We haven't implemented this yet in PhoneGap. We've got a file API, so this kind of works towards being able to do this on top of it. If you think about it, some platforms give us direct access to only one place to store media, but other platforms give us many places to store media, so there's no real easy way to do this that's clear to me, not yet. App Launcher is really cool. So has anyone here done any Android programming? Okay, I won't get into it then. If it was like an Android strong group, I'd feel more comfortable talking about it. But essentially the idea here is that we can subscribe to certain events of data, and then we can allow apps to be launched to that data. This is a pretty powerful and interesting idea because then we could swap out applications for different purposes, but we can do this all through our web browser. In this example, we're going to launch a PDF viewer. So Andy has another awesome quote: "Security-like correctness is not an add-on feature." And I love this idea because we're getting into an area of the web now that is intensely personal. And there are huge security implications for these devices knowing as much information about us as they do. Some platforms get this really right, others don't. If you have a browser, you can check out these links. The first one shows a prototype of an implementation. And I think I have an internet connection. I can show this to you. Not that. Not my tweets. So this is where the first link points. And there's no easy example or no easy answers here. I can't run that code. I'm not sure why I can't run that code because I probably didn't give it permission. So when I hit run, in this case, it dropped down this dialog that asked me, or is asking the user for permission to use these APIs. Currently, have you ever loaded a map and have a modal dialog fire up in your face and ask you, can I access your geolocation? Well, that's probably the right thing for it to do. But can you imagine if you loaded an app and it asked you, can I use your geolocation? Yeah, sure. Can I access your calendar? Yeah, why not? Can I access your file system? Sure. You could just sit there for an hour hitting yes. And so we don't want it to be modal, because we know modal is probably going to be annoying to the user. We don't want to have nothing, like an app store, because that would be a big security breach for the user too. So we need the user to have a way to know what APIs we're accessing in a non-intrusive way. But we also want to make sure that they have a way to get back to this and change it at a later time. So this is an early prototype of what it might look like. In a browser with Chrome, it's hard to say how this type of thing is actually going to fall back into installable web apps. And frankly, I don't think anybody knows what the right answer is. We just know how we don't want it to work. So then there's the WAC. And WAC stands for Wholesale Applications Community. It's a group of, I think, 72 carrier operators right now, something like that, mostly in Europe. Their goal is to take device APIs, create a standard, allow for widget-style installable web app development, and have a full standard for even App Store distribution. So different carriers would essentially federate the idea of an App Store. So you upload once, you get to all the carriers. I believe right now there's 111 App Stores. So that's a pretty big barrier to getting into all these places. If the WAC is successful, we'll only have to upload once, and it'll federate to all these other places. I don't know whether it'll work or not, but we'll see. The WAC is covering a really similar set of APIs to the DAP. And there's some parts of their APIs I really, really like. And this is one of them. List available features. We're able to actually iterate through what we can do. And so this would allow us to build a capability-like model. We could check into our code and see what's going to happen, what we are allowed to do. A great use for this would be in the case where we have an app that needs to use a front-facing camera or could use a front-facing camera. This would give us a way for checking whether or not there's one available. This is the DAP API for getting to the accelerometer. It might look familiar. So this is how the DAP defines it compared to the WAC. So in the first example, we pass a function in, and it drops in an object, and it's got an x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis properties. In the W3C DAP implementation, it drops in an object. It has this easy-to-type property called acceleration, including gravity, x, y, and z. Oh, boy. Good thing about standards. OK, so orientation. I actually really like this API. I think it's nice. We get a rotation object. That rotation object has an alpha, beta, and a gamma. It looks like some of the same people were at least talking about this at some point. If we compare the WAC to the W3C, we get an event object. It's got alpha, beta, and gamma. It's a slightly different API. The good news is it's just JavaScript. The WAC version of accessing the camera, capture image. So for some contrast, we could look at how the W3C does this with the capture API. But I don't want to look at any more of this. So there's other areas that are pretty interesting that aren't really covered by device APIs, but are really, really close to your device. So file system is obviously huge. One of the kind of features of the web is it never had a file system, but now we do. We have full-on file I/O. There's the whole geospatial group of things, so accelerometers and gyroscopes and geolocation. Notifications is fascinating. Right now they're working on it for the desktop, but we've got notifications coming to our phone, and they're all fairly consistent. It's a message, it's an icon, it's being pushed to your device. There's no reason why this doesn't come back to your back to the DAP for mobile. And then finally, widgets, which is basically what we've been talking about the whole time. Myself and one of the other Nitobians have started looking at taking some of these APIs and wrapping them because it's pretty clear that the standards groups aren't going to necessarily come to any convergence, so a jQuery-like thing. In fact, I know that RIM is interested in this idea. We're calling it high five, kind of like HTML5, but high five. It's worth checking out. It's really nascent and kind of funny. If we jump over to the browser. So an example might be something like this. Rather than doing navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition, why don't I just say location? This is nascent stuff. We haven't really gotten anywhere with it, but we like the concepting. So if you're interested in the idea, check it out. We're going to play with it. So mobile software development is a lot like a hockey player fighting two bears at once. Hockey players are tough, so are mobile software developers, so the bears try and gang up on them. The problem that we have is that we're in this sort of new world where all these device manufacturers and software vendors realize that they have a shot at an operating system, which they haven't had in over 10 years. And so we're seeing 10 different operating systems come out of nowhere, and they're all competing for your mind share to get in your pocket, essentially. With all these operating systems come SDKs. And you can see where I'm going with this. if you're doing software development, it's got to hit all these different platforms. You not only have to have all these different operating systems, but you have to have all the SDKs for these operating systems. And so this is a really big problem area for the software developers of today. The web already solved this problem. But the problem with the web is that the SDKs also don't give us really a good idea. Not a problem with the web, the problem with these SDKs, another big problem with these devices. Emulators don't really emulate anything. We end up having to get devices, but I think Resig figured out over a year ago that you need about $4,000 worth of equipment to successfully test all the different browsers for mobile. And this just simply isn't realistic for most people. And so what happens, or what we see happening, are people just building for one platform. And that's really too bad. And this is why the web is so important. So in the PhoneGap project, we're prototyping a lot of this stuff. If you're interested, you can check out docs.phonegap.com to see the different things that we're doing around device APIs. And I think I actually went a little bit fast, so I can show you guys some demos of this stuff for sure. Why don't we do that? Why don't we build a mobile app? Just for fun. I already kind of built one before we started. Has anyone here actually built a PhoneGap application? Right on. That's awesome. Okay. So there's a new tool that we built a little while ago. It's called Cordova. Let's call this Mobilism. I already had a Mobilism. Mobo. Okay. So this tool allows us to generate a PhoneGap project from the command line. It's kind of the lowest level of PhoneGap possible. I don't know that everyone is super comfortable working in the command line. It's okay if you aren't. We're going to wrap this stuff up. It gives you a bunch of other tools to work with once you get there. So when we're building an app in PhoneGap, there's always a www directory. This is no different than when you build like a W3C widget for any of these other platforms. If we look at the www directory, it's got, surprisingly, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So here's an example of some HTML that we're going to fire inside of a couple of different platforms at once. The other part of PhoneGap that we're working on getting involved, and this is from the widget spec. And so, like I was saying, all we're doing in here is we're defining icons, your title, your description, that sort of thing. Cool. And then we got a basic makefile. I'm not going to make a BlackBerry app. And it's not because I don't love you guys, it's because I don't have Windows on this machine. So, you're gone. You're gone. The old joke is that Android emulator is just like Android, it takes forever. Actually, check it out, here's Circle of Death. So in the background, we're compiling. This is just a necessary evil of working with native platforms. Oh, iOS built before Android finished building. It's pretty classic. So that was a brand new code base built to 2 platforms in roughly 1 minute. It's not bad, right? And So that's what the PhoneGap platform is all about. We can also get, obviously, back into all the other platforms that support having a web view. And that's really the big deal. But this isn't about PhoneGap in any way whatsoever. What we're more so about is the mobile web. Luke's right. You should build for the mobile web first. You're going to hit more platforms, and you don't have to go through the distribution nightmare that's 111 app stores. If you use a tool like PhoneGap, you could consider it a progressive enhancement to get into app stores at a later time. That's our belief. So this little tool is called Cordova, and it's kind of brand new. And it comes with all these little helpers. When we first build a PhoneGap application, we obviously want to create native code. We obviously want to compile whatever in our www directory into the native directories. But there's other things that we want to do, like kick up emulators, which it'll do automatically. Has anyone here ever seen Winery before? Oh yeah, this is kind of awesome. So Winery and this concept is actually going to be built right into WebKit Remote soon. Gives us a remote WebKit inspector instance. So let's go grab an iOS simulator because it's the most friendly to this idea. I'm going to load it in the browser because I don't want to deal with Android. Okay, so iOS on the one side, Winery on the other side. Oh. Winery not only gives you like a full-on console, which I think is the most useful thing ultimately, it gives you access to the DOM elements that are running inside iOS. This is pretty nice because pretty much from this point earlier, what was happening inside your mobile browser was a black box. We didn't have access to any of these DOM elements. We didn't know what was going on in there. So this is an extremely useful tool for us. We're building this into PhoneGap build on PhoneGap.com so that other people can use this without having to get into the Java. Not that Java's all that bad, but you know. And you can edit DOM nodes, whatever. It's pretty cool. And so part of this Cordova project, if you want to check it out, it's on GitHub. Brian Leroux, Cordova. And Winery comes as a part of that. Another tool that you may be interested in is build.phonegap.com. Which allows you to upload your own index HTML file to our web service, and we'll do the building, and we return binaries for you ultimately on the other side. This way you don't have to actually install anything. You can just upload web assets and then play with it on your phone and distribute it that way. We are building this into build.phonegap.com at debug.phonegap.com, so if you want to play with Winery and PhoneGap at the same time, you can check that out. So I went pretty quick, which I tend to do. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Hi. You talked about the WAC and the W3C DApp. First of all, I thought the WAC was working with W3C. So they would have converged into the one API, and then the next question, of course, would be if they are implementing different things, what is going to be on the devices?
Yeah, it's baffling to me too. So there's these two different standards bodies, and a lot of the same people are on them, but they haven't converged on the same APIs, but their target abstraction is JavaScript. So you know, it wouldn't be hard to write a shim to overcome that from an end developer perspective. Should they be working more closely together? I guess so, but
So W3C is the people that are building the browsers, as opposed WAC is more the operators that are building, let's say, the app stores, or anyway, that are selling the apps. So the operators are going to tell Nokia, if you want to sell phones, you have to have WAC. Nokia is going to say, well, I don't care about WAC, I want to do DAP.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I don't think the end users care, and the developers just want a way to write apps and distribute.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And then, of course, you end up where developers don't know which one to do, so they don't do any of the two.
Yeah. Well, if one thing the web development community is used to, it's dealing with the challenges of competing specs. So I think if your target abstraction is JavaScript, the point's kind of moot anyways, because it's pretty easy to write a wrapper that covers both of them. Is it acceptable? I don't know. It's the reality. I don't love it. In the PhoneGap project, we've implemented a plugins layer, so we will support both sets of APIs interchangeably. So users will be able to choose which ones they want to use. Hopefully the standards eventually converge, and I think they will.
So you don't have a preference?
Sorry?
You don't have a preference as a
No, I don't like either. I'm serious. Yeah. Do we have any more questions? Yes. Make the poor man run. Sorry, man? Oh, well, yeah, let's mic you up.
Is this winery works only with PhoneGap applications?
No, it just works standalone. Any browser instance, so it's in no way connected to PhoneGap at all.
So I can use it with any website to test how it works in the simulator?
That's right.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Is there any more questions? I'll be around all week. Oh, wait, shit, someone's got a question.
Last one. Is there going to be some support for also like swiping and stuff like that and gestures? You're going to put that in, or you recommend using different libraries for that?
I haven't seen any gesture support in any standards yet. I do believe that it's an interesting concept. I know touch APIs did just hit the W3C, and essentially they cloned what Apple had already done. And I'm happy that it's going to become a standard, because we don't really have a proper touches implementation yet on Android and some of the other platforms. No gesture APIs yet. We get this really low-level touches object and on gesture start and end, which is also quite low-level. It's pretty trivial to implement your own gesturing on top. And I believe there's something like 200 or 300 jQuery plugins that already cover this. So, yeah. Actually, jQuery Mobile has a lot of really robust touch handling code, which is fully worth stealing. So. Okay. Thank you.